Hello, good people. This is Sister Julia Walsh, and you're listening to Messy Jesus Business. Welcome to the Mess. I'm here with Kaitlin Curtice, who is an award-winning author, poet, storyteller, and public speaker. As an enrolled citizen of the Potawatomi Nation, Kaitlin writes on the intersections of spirituality and identity and how that shifts throughout our lives. In 2020, Caitlin's award-winning book, Native: Identity, Belonging, and Rediscovering God, won Georgia Author of the Year in the religion category. Besides her many books, Kaitlin has written online for Sojourners, On Being, Oprah Daily, and more. She also writes essays and poetry for the Liminality journal. Kaitlin, welcome to Messy Jesus Business.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm honored to have you as a guest. I've been following your work for a number of years and have been impressed with how prolific you are and how you really are a humble leader in spaces of spirituality and the amplification of Indigenous concerns, Indigenous spirituality, and integrating that with the Christian story also. I always like to start with a little vocation story. How did you come to know how you were called to share your gifts with the world?
I've been writing since I was little. I have journals since age 7 on to this year. I actually went through and read all of them last year, journal by journal, and just wanted to revisit the different seasons of my own life with love and acceptance in ways maybe I couldn't have done in previous years. And that was really moving because it showed me how much words and poetry and really art in all its forms, music. I'm also a singer-songwriter. So just how much words and their power has meant to me throughout my life literally has been such a lifeline for me. And I think that has just morphed into different iterations of that at different times. And my current iteration is that I happen to be an author. Yeah, it's always been a part of who I am, a deep, deep part of who I am. And I love it with all my heart. I love writing.
So little girl Kaitlin, would she be surprised by who you are now? Who you've become?
Maybe. I never, when I was little, I never thought I would be a published author. I thought maybe I would be a teacher or do something that had to do with words, or a singer, write music and sing. So she might be a little surprised, but I think in all the best ways,
And you're also a mother and you're married. You're living the fullness of life, it seems. Yeah. So in this season of launching a new book, Everything is a Story, Reclaiming the Power of Stories to Heal and Shape Our Lives. What are you noticing about your own story and how it's cyclical?
I love that.
Which is one of the themes I noticed in your book.
Yeah, that's become a really strong undercurrent of all of my writing. I realized recently that even of my children's books, the main theme of my writing is connecting to ourselves, to one another, and to Mother Earth. When I look back at all of my books, that's in all of them, that's there. It's existing there. And so a huge part of that is cycles and cyclical ways of being. And I mean, right now we're about to enter into winter time, the winter solstice. So that's certainly a time of going inward and listening to our own lives and starting a new calendar year. So there's a lot of inventory, I think, that we take as people. So that's kind of where I'm sitting, is that really special time of asking big questions of who I've been and who I am and who I hope to become. And winter in general is a really special time to do that. So I'm excited to lean into that. I think especially because launching a book is so busy. So I think it'll be nice to sit with that for a bit,
Yeah, have a bit more calm and peace, which is the summons of Advent, especially, and solstice, right? I was so excited when I saw the title of your new book, Everything is a Story, because as another worker with words, I have reflected often about the power of storytelling and the importance in how stories not only shape a person, us as individuals, the stories we tell ourselves, they shape our perspectives on what's happening and the reality that's surrounding us. But it's also shapes the collective imagination. And so I'd like to, before we dive specifically into the message of your book, what was your inspiration for writing everything as a story? And what were you thinking about in order to write about such a big concept of storytelling?
This came to me after I had written Living Resistance, my last book, and it came out. I thought, this is my fourth adult nonfiction. I've written 4 children's books, and I've been writing for a decade. And I thought, being someone who has written about the power of stories anyway, what if I actually just got to write about the power of stories? I knew I didn't want it to be just about which stories are right and which stories are wrong. I wanted it to be about the bigness of stories and how they show up in the world and how they are like these living beings that are moving and growing and breathing, and we are participating in that. I wanted a book that would allow us to like look at stories almost from the outside and just honor how important they are. And then also then go back into ourselves and ask how we participate in the lives of those stories. So yeah, that was always my sort of motivations going into writing it. And then, acorns and oak trees, which we can get into. That's such a powerful metaphor in my life and globally in so many people's lives and cultures all over the world. So I was excited to sort of weave the framework in with the life of a story.
Yeah, let's go there now. Tell us about the acorns and the oak trees.
Well, I always create frameworks with my books. Like Living Resistance has the realms of resistance, which is a cyclical sort of a framework. And with this one, it also is cyclical, but acorns are really special, just spiritual items for me. I have a bunch all around my office. And oak trees are sort of this universal, majestic, mighty tree. The acorns have been used in so many places throughout history and in so many ways. And so I thought, what if I could follow the life cycle of a story by following the life cycle of an oak tree? And I knew it would be kind of out there and interesting, but I was really happy that my publisher was excited about it because I was so excited. So I read books about oaks along with all the other books I read. It was so much fun to research like the different shapes of acorns. Well, stories also are sort of birthed with different shapes and in their being, and how do we approach them? And then also the book is helping us move through those life cycle moments like childhood, adolescence, adulthood, elderhood. And I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed writing within the framework of the oak's life. I just think it's a really beautiful metaphor.
I'd love for you to read a little bit for us from Everything is a Story.
Yeah, I would love to. This is a chapter of the book on stories of faith and religion. And I wanted to write even the same kind of idea of stepping outside of what faith and spirituality and religion are, and why do we need God or gods? Why do we need to make sense of the world? So I wrote about that in the book, but this is the poem that's at the end of that chapter. At some point in our lives, we declare that we are going to find God, going to explore the world and demand an explanation for all that has gone wrong and all that we desperately hope to change along the way. How does one find God exactly? Where do we look? Because at the end of the day, what makes one place holy and another place secular? What makes one person saintly and another one heathen? Perhaps at the end of the journey, we find only mirrors on walls in the eyes of other humans, in the presence of every living creature, in the touch of a tree's rough bark or the swell of an ocean's wave. Quite suddenly, we are aware of our own beloved smallness. And quite suddenly, we realize that we were never meant to find God, whatever God is. We were meant to acknowledge that we were always the mirror ourselves, hands over our hearts, looking into the sacred and understanding that the sacred is looking right back.
Thank you so much. There's a lot to unpack in that poem, just like there's a lot to unpack in your whole book.
Yeah.
This ignites a little question for me, Kaitlin. And I'm wondering if you would be comfortable sharing about belief and faith at this point in your development, your own story, your own journey, and what the shape of that is and how that influences your work?
Two words that come to mind in my own spiritual journey is expansiveness and liminality. I write at the Liminality journal for my Substack, and it's just a beautiful community of people. For those that don't know, liminality is the gray areas of life, the spaces where we don't quite know yet. We don't quite have things figured out, or it's complex. I think that if we're honest, that's where so many of us live spiritually, is in those deep questions. And the expansiveness just comes from wanting to embrace mystery and the sacred in all of their forms. And that's a lot bigger than what I grew up with growing up in the Southern Baptist tradition. So I think Rumi writes about the ever widening circles of life. And that's such a beautiful metaphor that we can continue to widen and expand as we grow. And that's something I never really want to stop doing, to live in a liminal way and to expand are both things that are, I think, lifelong endeavors.
I'm reminded of a couple things. A few weeks ago, I was in a little conversation with the Catholic writer, Shannon K. Evans, who happened to be visiting St. Rose Convent, where I live here in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And we were just in a little chat, and we were just talking about writer things and this and that. And she said, I think one of the things that she named that she was thinking about a lot lately is the difference between certitude and faith, and how so much of American Christianity seems to be emphasizing certainty, which is very different from faith. So I'm reminded of that. And I'm also reminded of how in my own journey as a Catholic, as a Franciscan sister, deciding to commit myself to the vows that I live, to also this very awkward space of publicly being a Catholic sister, and how complicated and messy that is, especially because of the church history and how much harm our institution has caused in the world. Yeah, and people have a lot of judgments, right? It felt like a little crisis of faith around when I was preparing to profess my final vows as a sister about 10 years ago, where I was like, wait a minute, I don't even know what I believe. How can I say yes to this forever if I don't even know what I believe? And then I remember the work of, I think it was Elizabeth Johnson, who was writing about Karl Rahner's work, and where Karl Rahner named a name for God is Holy Mystery. And then I was like, oh, wait, I can commit to Holy Mystery. That, I can surrender to that. Yeah. That makes sense. That's comfortable. It's doable. Yeah. I don't know if it's comfortable.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what some of what you're saying is like? Is it about accepting the uncertainty and the mystery is for you what healthy spirituality is?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that when we get trapped in certainty, we're trapping our own souls, which are incredibly expansive entities. There's this conversation about whether our souls exist inside of us or outside of us. And I always think that it's probably both. It's just so all-encompassing of who we are and who we could never even understand or hope to be, because our souls know us so well, and they know what's beyond and above and around us. And any sort of spiritual beliefs or any beliefs, political beliefs, social beliefs, any sort of beliefs that we are so sure of cuts off that embracing of mystery and of the bigness of our own souls to grow and change and emerge and ask deep questions. And to be people who continue to grow in the world, we should live in that expansive way. And so I love that you remembered that it's okay to have the uncertainty in that moment, because we'll never be completely certain, and that's okay. That's a beautiful thing. That's part of the blueprint of being human.
And here we are in messy Jesus business. I would say it's part of the messiness of Christian discipleship too, especially when I think of the early disciples and how when you read the Gospels, it's like they were so confused about what Jesus was really up to. And they seem to have these It's comical to me when I think about it, because Jesus was like, hey guys, we're going here and this is what we're up to. And they'd be like, but when are you going to sit on your throne?
Yeah. Yeah.
They were just so human, and he was
Yeah.
so patient and loving, and it'd be like, oh, okay, also frustrated probably at times. And like, isn't that messy? Isn't that discipleship? Like, to be a person of faith is like to be projecting these expectations, these ideas, and then realize like, oh, I'm actually in a different reality.
Yeah.
Which loops us back to your book. Everything is a story. And I'd love to invite you to share a bit more about the message that you're hoping people will be pondering as they conclude reading Everything is a Story.
Yeah. You know, the subtitle of the book, well, the title and subtitle, but let's start with the subtitle: Reclaiming the Power of Stories to Heal and Shape Our Lives. I use these three categories: the liminal, lethal, and loving stories. Labels only get us so far, so I don't want us to go all the way with this, but labels can be helpful. And if we see a story and we can name, that's the story of harm, how am I participating in that story? How am I a part of it? And can I reclaim the power of a story for healing, for love, for kinship in the world? I think we're doing that all the time as humans. We're always trying to figure that out. But I would like for people to read my book and have that sort of at the forefront of their minds, you know, as they are working through their own stories and the stories they encounter in the world. And then the title, that everything is a story, is actually such a beautiful but incredibly overwhelming reality when we really sit and think about it, that the desk I'm sitting at, there's a story attached to how it was built. And the rocks that are on my altar have a story. And all the pictures in my house, all of my clothing tells a story about how clothes are made and how we consume them. So if you just look around your home or go on a walk outside, you'll realize that there are stories everywhere. And that when you sort of open that portal, they will come to you. And that's a beautiful thing, but can be a lot. And so to allow ourselves to be open to the reality of stories being alive is a really powerful and important practice that we should have in the world right now.
That example of material goods having stories reminds me of sort of my own justice awakening stage of life when I was in my early 20s and I was returning to the United States from South Africa, and just had this new consciousness about the complexity of and the impact of globalization economically, but also on people. And I remember, I think I was just sitting there in my like dorm room or something, eating a bowl of cereal, and I started to get really like anxious about like, I don't know how the people were treated that produced this cereal. I don't know how the cow was treated that made this milk. Were their rights uplifted, and was the dignity protected of every person who was involved in this? And also like, how was the soil treated that grew the grain? You know, and and it just like became this very intense layer of question, and there was no way I could really know. Because I became really overwhelmed and anxious about it, I struggled with my mental health for a while.
Yeah.
And it took some time for me to recover. I wonder if you have learned some practical ways of like, in this liminal, in this unknowing, or in this knowing, how do you still find joy and resist and show up and share truth and wonder?
I think so much of the beauty I've been finding in the world, especially right now, there's so much turmoil everywhere. I find so much joy in celebrating, especially forms of art in the world, all sorts of forms of art, the way that artists are showing up and producing things, they're alchemizing their grief and their fear and the overwhelm of the world. You know, I think that every time I'm overwhelmed, even if I'm just like on Instagram and I see a reel of an artist who's creating something beautiful, I have like a moment of uplift, like, okay, we're going to be okay because there are still artists in the world, and they may be creating completely like resistance art, or they may be creating something else, or maybe something silly that makes us laugh, or maybe something really serious. That whole spectrum and what counts as art and resistance and ways to bring hope to the world. And I find a lot of hope in that. Those are the people I turn to, musicians and writers and the poets and the people who make beautiful like digital art and share it. All of those people bring so much hope. And those people often are also really feeding that back into their communities wherever they live. And that's really encouraging in the time that we're living in right now.
So it's creativity, the power of creativity, which connects to the great creator and the beauty of nature. And what I have discovered is the importance of being in relationship with trees, with animals, with plants, finding ways to pay attention to the beauty in the world and reverence it, to give it the awe and the wonder that it's worthy of by our attention. There's so much richness in Indigenous spirituality, and you share some of that in your work. And yet, if there's something here in this space that you would really want to invite people to ponder and reflect on in this season.
I think many people are trying to find their way sort of back home to themselves, for lack of a better word, or back home to the earth. Indigenous peoples across the world, globally, throughout history, have been modeling that. And I think it's a time when we can see how community works through the Indigenous lens globally. And again, how art thrives and moves within Indigenous communities. I just shared on my Substack, like a book list for if you're shopping for people who love science, they should read this book. If you're shopping for a rom-com fiction novel, read this book by this Indigenous author, so I was just sharing like different sort of topical books, but that made me just think about how all over the place there are such beautiful and deep Indigenous voices who are creating their art and doing their thing, however that looks, but that they're also helping us point back to the earth and back to community and back to kinship. And that's at the root of our cultures, and that's such a beautiful gift to give to the world, especially in this kind of time that we're living in, to help us find ways to be tethered and feel connected when things are so disconnected and scary, and it's hard to trust. So to have that kind of kinship-based connection with the world around us, I think is really important right now.
What does that look and feel like? How do we know when we're moving in that direction?
I do practices with people, like helping people write love letters to Mother Earth. I do a lot of writing workshops, and they're very spiritually motivated. It's writing as a spiritual practice, not just writing just to write, or leading retreats with people where we are able to spend time outside. I think we can feel something begin to shift inside of us. When you write a love letter to Mother Earth and you're recognizing Mother Earth as a being and not just a thing that is a planet, you feel something shift inside of you. If you look at your house plants in your home and you see them as living beings who are helping you live and breathe and bring beauty to your life, something's going to shift inside of you, how you see the world, how you see yourself. There's going to be like a connectedness that happens. And I think that if we are paying attention, we feel that, we experience it. People have had incredibly mystical moments outside in nature. I write so much of my poetry when I've been in nature. So much art is created when we get still enough to pay attention. And so I do think we begin to feel it. And I think, of course, there are rituals and practices that we can do that ground us even deeper, like writing love letters to Mother Earth. But there is a shift in our own consciousness, I think, that needs to happen for us to really show up in the world differently. And I think that because of how just the ways that we're seeing, for example, the sheer power of corporate greed, that people are turning and saying, well, what's the alternative? What's the alternative to this way of living that has been part of our economies and society for so long? Maybe that is to honor the earth and honor that relationship. That's a part of it, to honor our communities. So there's so much there, but it takes an unlearning inside of us, a rewiring of how we see the world.
So are you saying that we'll have a sense that our connection is improving or growing if we're moving from a sort of an individual mindset to a communal mindset?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's very countercultural in the United States for us to be interdependent, for us to be communally minded instead of about oneself.
Mm-hmm.
And this to me aligns totally with the gospel and the message in the New Testament of remembering that we're many parts, but we're all one body, right? And so we're all members of each other. We need one another to be whole and to be holy. How do we shift our collective consciousness and tell new stories that bring us as a culture to a new way of imagining and thinking and believing about it?
I think it's a multi-step process, honestly, and a cyclical one. I think it's kind of like the stages of grief. It comes in these waves and stages of accepting history for what it's actually been. What are the stories we've actually inherited? Like in the United States, the stories about Indigenous people that we still carry around that aren't true or that are really harmful. Can we look at those honestly? Can we grieve the stories that have been told that shouldn't have been told or the way they've been told? Can we grieve together, not just on our own, but hold each other's grief in that? And then as we move through that, can we begin to imagine or dream again? And the hard part right now is that maybe we're in the accepting and seeing things clearly and the grieving part collectively, maybe we're in that part. And it's kind of hard to see right now. It's kind of hard to see what's ahead, but we can still dream about it. And that's, again, where art shows up to help us imagine that. Poets are powerful because they speak truth into the world. They see things and then they dream up the next world, or they dream up what's ahead and what's coming. And that's really, really powerful work. And I think that we can do that collectively as well, and not just on an individual level, but it takes commitment to one another and a commitment to telling the truth. And that's difficult.
I am reminded of some hard times I've been in communities that I've been a part of in my own life. And the most painful times have been those times where we are all stuck in our own story about the reality, right? And we all get very trapped by the story that we're telling ourselves about what's happening and why it's happening, instead of having the humility and the openness to listen to one another and say, how do you see this? What's your understanding?
Yeah.
I'm just remembering the pain, but also like my own temptation to become defensive, to become attached, to become possessive of like, no, I know the truth in this story. You all have a warped sense of reality, and my sense of reality is right. And then like how that breaks down trust, it breaks down welcome, it breaks down all the things that I think matter and make us human. So that's probably some of what's going on in our nation, on this land at this time, among people. Yet there is the common story of like, we are all suffering. We all are struggling here, and we're all moving to something different. So I wonder how to foster the practice of storytelling in a way that invites us to listen more.
I think a big part of this is the speed with which we want to tell stories and with which we want to heal the wounds. For example, when it comes to boarding schools in the US and our native boarding schools that have that history that still isn't over, it's like we've got this big festering wound on our arm. America has this wound. And instead of like really looking at the wound, we just keep putting bandages over it. We just keep covering up the wound. And it's just festering beneath that bandage. So just because you put a bandage on a wound doesn't mean it's going to heal. You have to take all the bandages off. You have to ask how the wound got there. You have to figure out what kind of medicine you need to heal the wound. And then you have to do the work of healing the wound. And I think about that metaphor a lot for us, that we aren't willing to take the time to look at the wounds and ask how they got there in the first place, to talk about the doctrine of discovery or colonialism or just hate and the ways that we harm one another in general. And we don't want to look, like we don't want to see it. And we don't know exactly how long the healing will take. We want fast fixes. And that's not how storytelling works. Like even oral stories were passed down generation to generation, they take time and they sort of morph and grow and have this beautiful way of changing. Those stories take time to become who they are. And that's really hard because some of our stories need to change now. Like some of our trauma, our collective trauma as a nation, our individual trauma, our pain needs to be healed soon. But you can't just jump to that without knowing what's got us here. And that's really hard. That is such a hard reality of the power of stories. But it's the truth about how they work.
Friend speaks my mind, as they say in the Quaker tradition. Yeah, amen, Kaitlin. Yeah, I don't know if you know this, but my community, the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration, unfortunately participated in the harmful practice of sponsoring a boarding school.
Yeah.
At the Bad River Reservation, the Ojibwe people, only about 5 years ago did my sisters and our community come to learn more about the complexity of the history and started down a path of truth and healing.
Yeah.
And first, one of the things we did quickly, which was the easiest, was a land acknowledgement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we participated in trainings hosted by Land Justice Futures. A group of sisters were greatly involved. Recently, at the end of October, we returned a parcel of land in the North Woods to the Ojibwe people that were local to that parcel of land, which is the Lacto Flambeau Band of Ojibwe. And it was a beautiful, joyous event and very exciting. And we were so grateful that it happened and very momentous and all the things. Yet, what I was aware of during that time was like a similar metaphor, like Band-Aid on a wound or whatever. But I was thinking there's a mountain range of pain caused by this history. And we like snuck into a cave and we found a little crack and we like tried to like plaster it up. Sure, maybe we need to tend to this crack, right? This little pain, but there's so much pain. There's so much suffering. There's so much harm that's been caused by this history. So this was just like a start. We have to keep doing the work. We have to stay in relationship and remain friends and develop that relationship. And it needs to go deep into the generations. Our sisters need to be transformed by all that we can learn by being in relationship. And so anyway, I'm aware of that too. I'm even aware of how in the practice of oppressive government structures or systems is to try to rewrite the history or to erase history. And like, I mean, that's been happening in the Catholic Church for centuries, and it's definitely happening now in the United States.
Yeah.
The power and the importance of historians and archives and museums, and this, again, the oral tradition, the storytelling that helps us to remember, like, no, this is how grandpa went through it. This is what it was like for her great grandma.
Yeah. The focus on future generations is so important of what have we inherited and what are we holding? And then what are we passing on to whoever comes after us? What stories will be given to them? In the book, I talk about how the kind of last season of life for the oak tree is when the acorns start dropping again, so you've kind of come full circle, and not all acorns become oak trees again. Some of them are composted back to the earth, which is beautiful. Some of them are grown again into trees, which is beautiful. And can we compost some of our stories, and can we then take the others and let them grow again in the world? And what does that look like? And that's going to be a story on story basis, of like, should this story be composted or should we let it grow again? Or just having that thinking ahead to future generations, I think is really powerful and important.
Amen. Amen. So, Kaitlin, what else would you like to say about what it means to be a person of faith or a person in that liminal space who's exploring spirituality and teaching about it, and the power of story in that work?
Someone was asking me at an event recently, this is just something I've been thinking about a lot lately, so I'll share. Her question was just kind of like, how do I write when my own life is so chaotic, let alone the noise of the world? And I was talking to her about that, just kind of the spiritual mystic idea that there is that undercurrent always of you could call it mindfulness or presence, or just this quiet stillness that's always there. I've written poetry from airport terminals, and I've written stories in my OBGYN office waiting room. And there are those moments where you kind of like almost allow time to stop around you, as if you could like see a fly like paused in the air as it's buzzing, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's probably very Matrix-like, but there's an undercurrent of stillness that we can find. And I think we really need that right now as we tell stories, as we alchemize stories, as we live in these liminal spaces, as we ask really difficult questions, as we show up, if we're activists showing up in the world, or how we show up to our communities, all of the art we do. There's like these moments of presence and care that we need to participate in, actively participate in, to like kind of flow from that deeper place. And I think a lot of healing will come from that if we're willing to do that together on our own and collectively.
I'm hearing there the call to enter into the messiness of contemplation.
Yeah.
And to foster those contemplative practices in our lives, to deepen our prayer, to deepen our mindfulness, our attention, to slow down and notice how we are part of a bigger picture, a bigger story.
Yeah. And it's not just passive, because I think that's often the thing is then, well, you're just sitting in a room being still isn't going to do anything in the world. But those moments of presence help us know who we need to be in the world so that we can show up in the right ways, in the ways that matter. And that's really important. I just think we underestimate it, and we need to find those practices again, I think.
It's been so lovely to talk with you about all this really important message. And I'd love to hear just a bit more. Typically, I ask my guests to conclude by sharing how they understand the messiness of gospel living. What's their experience of that?
Oh, I was some sort of church leader from age 10 to adulthood. And I think that it's important to trust the seasons that we find ourselves in, that there are seasons where we need to step away from certain things, certain roles, certain spaces. There are seasons where we are in it, and that's where we know we need to be. And I think it's important that we all sort of just take stock and trust the season we're in. I think that that's really important. Trust where your journey is taking you. Choose carefully the people you're listening to. Trust your intuition where you are in those spaces. Spiritual spaces can be beautiful and they can be harmful, So, and I've lived in both. So learning how to navigate that is important. And I think we just kind of have to have our finger on the pulse of that constantly. And that's just, again, cyclical, seasonal living. It's always going to be a part of who we are.
Yeah. And so we trust.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for trusting us here at Messy Jesus Business with your time and your story, your truth. I hope that you will share with our listeners how they can find your books and support you and your work.
Yeah. The Liminality Journal is my favorite corner of the internet. So my Substack, and you can be a paid subscriber and do writing sessions with me, or just free subscriber, and you'll still get lots of my words. We write poetry together. It's just beautiful. And I'm also on Instagram, on social media, but my Substack is really where I live when I'm not writing books. So,
and you have a website too, don't you?
Yeah, KaitlinCurtice.com.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kaitlin, for coming on Messy Jesus Business.
Thank you.
Yeah. And blessings on all your work and all you're doing to share true stories with the world in need.
Miigwech, thank you.
Messy Jesus Business is produced and edited by Colin Wamskans. You can find us online at messyjesusbusiness.com and on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Patreon. If you like what you heard, please be sure to mention our podcast to your friends and followers. And we'd love to have your support via Patreon. From the bottom of our hearts and the middle of the mess, thank you. Messy Jesus Business is produced in partnership with the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. You can learn more about our religious community and donate to our mission at www.fspa.org. I'm Sister Julia Walsh, and I'll catch up with you next time. Until then, peace and all good.